3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
All right, welcome to Roots of Reality. I'm your host, Ben Baumann, and today I'm going to be talking about the history of American presidents abusing their power. So throughout American history, there have been many presidents who have abused their power to do wrong in the country. For example, Franklin D. Roosevelt in World War II would put over 100,000 Japanese Americans in internment camps due to the belief that they could be spies for Japan, despite the fact that there was not only no evidence for this, but no Japanese Americans were ever even convicted of spying. Or there was Dwight D. Eisenhower, who in 1953 banned all non-heterosexual Americans from working in government, which led to thousands of people losing their jobs. And then, of course, there was Richard Nixon, who was involved in the Watergate scandal, where the Democratic National Headquarters was broken into and wiretapped. And when people found out, Nixon would then try to cover it up before being forced to resign. And next there was Bill Clinton, who had an affair with a White House intern in the 90s and then tried to illegally cover it up before then being impeached by the United States House of Representatives in 1998. So American history has had its fair share of bad behaving presidents. Unfortunately, though, nothing can top recent events because last but not least, we have former President Donald Trump and the current Republican candidate for president. Now, as of this moment, there has been a lot of debate about how people should talk about President Donald Trump because obviously he narrowly escaped a horrific assassination attempt recently. Yet, as a society, we also can do two things at once. We can condemn the attack on Trump and still maintain our criticism of him as a candidate and former president, because this is a democracy. And after all, when you run for public office, you're running to make decisions on people's lives. Thus, we can be unified in our condemnation of violence as Americans, but still, as we always should with any president, have our criticisms of Trump or Biden or anyone else who assumes that position of power or attempts to assume that position of power, regardless of their circumstances of health or what they've had to overcome in life. Because this is not about them, this is about our future as a society. And so when thinking about Trump's politics, he has certainly been a lightning rod of controversy his entire political career, beginning in 2016 when he had paid to have sex with a porn star while his wife was pregnant prior to the 2016 election, and then illegally tried to cover it up to prevent it from hurting his presidential campaign. And later, in 2024, he would then become a convicted felon for this crime. Additionally, during his presidency in 2019, he would attempt to try and extort Ukraine by withholding aid from them, hoping to get in return negative information on his political opponent, Joe Biden, which he would then be impeached for the United States House of Representatives. And next, he would then also get impeached later by the U.S. House of Representatives again in 2021 for inspiring an attack on the U.S. Capitol and his attempted coup to overturn the election results and thus overthrowing the American government and will of the people. In turn, Trump is now running again for president today and currently against Joe Biden, at least unless Joe Biden is replaced at some point due to his age because he's super old and not looking so good. And the major question today for everyone should be, given the circumstances of what has happened recently, is Biden right to say that Trump is a threat to American democracy? Or is this dangerous and reckless and a potential cause of the assassination attempt on Donald Trump recently? And the reality of the situation is this. Of course, Donald Trump is a threat to American democracy, and no, Biden did not inspire the assassination attempt on Trump with his rhetoric. Donald Trump has consistently used authoritarian tactics to preserve his power. He himself has said that Biden will end American democracy if he is not elected, and has promoted violence himself. For example, in 2020, he inspired the biggest attack on the American democracy since the British burned Washington, D.C. to the ground in the War of 1812. I mean, we literally saw a bunch of crazy Trump supporters that invaded the Capitol building and resulted in a few people getting killed. So clearly, Trump has had much worse rhetoric than Biden. Additionally, there is also zero evidence that the shooter was inspired by Biden and was clearly just some wacko, as most people trying to assassinate politicians are. At the same time, though, it is important that we point out that any attack on Trump is obviously also an attack on American democracy, which is why it should be universally condemned. Because regardless of what Trump has said or done, and even if Trump truly is a threat to American democracy given his past actions, there is no excuse for violence ever. Voters have chosen him to represent the Republican Party, and that has to be respected in a democratic system. Also, if Trump was killed, imagine the violence that it could cause, possibly even a mini civil war. So luckily, Trump is okay for his own personal safety and the safety of the nation as a whole. But also, when it comes to Trump being a threat to democracy, you must understand that being a threat does not equate to him actually being able to end democracy. And he is certainly not at all comparable to Hitler, as some people have wrongly said. You see, many people in many democratic systems have done authoritarian things. Hitler went far beyond being an authoritarian. He actually ended a democracy, then started a world war, and then committed a Holocaust. So it really is insulting to the victims of Hitler to throw comparisons around as if Trump is like him. Trump is really similar at the moment to Silvio Berlusconi of Italy, if you want to look him up. Therefore, Trump can certainly damage democracy significantly, but ending it would be quite hard. Though not impossible, but some major things would need to happen for him to even be in the position to really try to work on that. For example, he'll have to win control of the House and Senate as well as the presidency, and he would also need the Supreme Court to let him do essentially whatever it wants. Unfortunately, that is not impossible given the recent immunity ruling by the Supreme Court, which essentially says for official acts, the president can just do whatever they want, which I don't know how they would define an official act, but it's pretty scary to think that a president could just say, oh, this is an official act because I said so, and therefore I'm going to be dictator for life. It's an official act. Or I'm going to call martial law and be dictator for life. It's an official act. Alternatively, perhaps the Supreme Court just says, well, we can reinterpret the Constitution, and, when it says term limits, that's unconstitutional because before we didn't have term limits. But at this point, all these things are still a big ask, and we're not near them yet, so I wouldn't worry too much, though it is certainly a concern to have, especially given Trump may also just be satisfied enough that he got elected again and can end all the investigations into the various potential crimes he has committed. Also, Trump is not exactly the hardest working president, nor the most intellectually based one, so whether he would have true interest and the mental stamina to become a true authoritarian dictator is hard to know. So at this time, I would say what comes after Trump would potentially pose an even greater threat than Trump himself, but no one truly knows for sure who that could be, which is why 2024 election is the most important election in American history. And no, that is not a hyperbole. As a historian and also as someone who is not a Republican or Democrat, being an independent, I can say that there's been a lot of crazy stuff in American history, and the partisanship that you can see in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party is troubling in many different ways. But we have not seen anything like Trump and sort of how he's morphed the Republican Party around himself. Additionally, if the U.S. does elect Trump, there really is no excuse for it. Rather, it just shows how much of a failure our educational system has become when it comes to critical thinking, civic knowledge, and our collective understanding of history. As well as the fact that we as a society are truly ill-prepared for the new information ecosystem that is the internet and social media, where anyone with a pulse can magically become a trusted source of information, even if in reality these people have no educational background in any of the topics they love to promote constantly, and instead are just cranking out conspiracy theories nonstop all the time on the internet, which is why we have large amounts of people believing in conspiracy after conspiracy, whether Democrat or Republican. You know, if you ask Democrats, January 6th was a horrific event to happen. If you ask a lot of Republicans, it's a conspiracy theory. Or if you ask Republicans, the assassination attempt on Trump was a horrific event. If you ask some Democrats, it's a conspiracy theory. So with that, we find ourselves in fairly troubling times historically, but at the same time, this is life. Crazy events happen all the time. You know, people were living through the Cold War in earlier generations, and before that, World War II, and before that, World War I, and before that, the Civil War. And you go back far enough, we have the American Revolution. So as a country, troubling times is kind of in our DNA, unfortunately to say. And just because we thought that we had kind of moved on beyond the chaos for a little while, the chaos really has never stopped and probably won't stop. That's just the game of life. However, the election is not over yet, and though Biden currently is losing, there is still time for him to turn around. But he will need to dramatically change things. And perhaps an even better solution may just be for him to drop out of the race altogether for a stronger candidate. Regardless, though, he is the only candidate running that has a chance to win that also believes in democracy. Thus, the nation's fate is in the hands of the voters. So we will see what happens, but as always, remember, billions of years led to you. So make the most of it.